The Vatican denies this tomb exists. But deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, there is a sealed chamber. A black coffin wrapped in 7 chains, each carved with the sigil of a demon from the Ars Goetia. 4 of those chains are already broken, and according to internal seismic logs the church will never release, something inside that coffin is starting to move. Officially, the Vatican only acknowledges a handful of excavations beneath St. Peter's: catacombs, old tombs, early Christian graves. Unofficially, there's another dig no one is meant to know about. In 1853, workers reinforcing the foundations beneath the basilica broke into a hidden corridor that wasn't on any map. A narrow, hand-carved passage leading to a single stone door, just 7 deep grooves cut into the rock, like something had once been bolted across it. The report from that night doesn't appear in any public archive, but a copy, misfiled in a minor diocesan collection in northern Italy, does. It describes a chamber no bigger than a small chapel. No walls of bones, no relics, just a raised stone platform. And on it, a coffin unlike anything they had ever seen. Black, metal, not wood, wrapped in 7 heavy chains, each link engraved with symbols the workers couldn't read, but one man recognized. A Jesuit scholar assigned to the dig identified them as demon seals, names taken from a medieval grimoire the church officially condemned, the Ars Goetia. According to the report, he begged them to reseal the door and leave the chamber untouched. They didn't. The official church line is simple: no such tomb exists, no such coffin exists, no such chains exist. But there's a pattern carved through the last century that's almost impossible to ignore. Sometime after 1913, 4 of those 7 chains fail. Not all at once, not with some Hollywood explosion, but gradually, under pressure, under something pushing back from the inside. The only trace we see on the surface is in a set of internal letters from Vatican engineers responsible for monitoring structural stress beneath the basilica. In 1914, one memo mentions unusual microtremors under a sealed section of the necropolis and recommends additional bracing near an unnamed chamber. Months later, in June 1914, the first of those 4 chains finally gives way. 2 days after that, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. Within weeks, Europe is on fire. World War I didn't start because a chain broke under Rome. But if you map the dates, the timing is disturbingly precise. By the 1940s, the tomb has been fully erased from official plans. No floor references, no chamber labels, nothing. But in 1943, an internal commission quietly upgrades the monitoring equipment beneath St. Peter's. Seismographs, motion sensors, instruments designed, according to one internal note, to track low-frequency anomalies with spiritual implications. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the United States detonates the first nuclear device in history at the Trinity Test Site in New Mexico. Every major seismic station on Earth records the distant shockwave, including one collection of instruments buried deep beneath Rome. The declassified global records show a spike that morning, but the Vatican's internal copy shows something else layered on top of it. A second pulse, delayed by a fraction of a second. Origin. Not New Mexico. Origin. Directly beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, whatever was in that coffin reacted to the first nuclear fire, and the second chain finally snapped. From that moment on, the world doesn't just fight wars, it lives under the permanent shadow of annihilation. That's what the first 2 breaks seem to do. They push our species into a new kind of madness. The first 4 chains don't weaken because of him. They weaken because of us. By now, the sequence is hard to ignore. A chain fails, and the outside world shifts. 1914, the first total war. 1945, the nuclear age. But the chains don't stop there. In 1968, Subterranean sensors beneath the Vatican register another unexplained anomaly. Not from an earthquake, not from construction. A spike, like something twisting against metal. That same year, the world convulses. Assassinations, riots, sudden revolutions, a church crisis so deep it nearly tears Catholicism apart. Another chain is believed to have failed. In 2001, it happens again. The logs we do have from a retired technician who claims he was forced to sign a lifelong silence clause describe a subterranean surge under St. Peter's on the morning of September 11th. He didn't see planes. He didn't see towers fall, but he saw the graph. It looked like a heartbeat. 16 minutes later, the first live images of smoke in New York appeared on his colleague's television. That day, the fourth chain is believed to have broken. 4 chains gone, 4 global shifts, each moment more destructive than the last, each one placing strain on something buried far below. And here's the part almost everyone gets wrong. The chains aren't failing because he's trying to escape. They're failing because humanity is helping him rise again. Each one weakened by a human-made catastrophe. Each one breaking exactly after the kind of event the old archives warned about. But the last 3, they're different because they're still waiting to happen. And history has a habit of leaving clues for us to explore. With 4 chains gone, analysts inside the Vatican began studying the pattern behind each failure. What they found wasn't mystical, it was mathematical. Every broken chain followed the same progression. A global event, a permanent change, a moment the world could never walk back from. That's why the 5th chain became their greatest concern. Not because of what it holds, but because of what triggers it. Buried inside a sealed memorandum from the 1950s is the only surviving reference to it. The 5th chain will weaken when something humanity depends on fails everywhere at once. No explanation, no clarification. Just that sentence. For decades, Vatican analysts quietly tracked every global system humans rely on, not to predict the future, but to understand how close we were to another irreversible moment. What disturbed them wasn't how fragile the world was becoming. It was how interconnected everything had become. A failure in one place could ripple across continents in minutes. A collapse in a single sector could trigger 6 more. A disruption meant for one region could hit every region. If the old memorandum is correct, the 5th era won't look like the past 4. It won't start with a gunshot, a bomb, or a crisis on television. It will begin with something failing. Not locally, not nationally, but everywhere. One of the analysts who reviewed the memorandum decades later wrote in the margin, "If the 5th chain ever weakens, we won't have time to react. We'll only know when it's already begun." The 4th chain broke in 2001. Since then, there hasn't been another failure. But the systems humanity relies on have never been more connected or more vulnerable. If the 5th era is coming, the Vatican believes we won't recognize it as an event. We'll recognize it as the moment the world suddenly stops working the way it always has, and by then, it will already be too late. If the 5th era is triggered by a collapse, the 6th era is different. It doesn't come from failure. It comes from creation. The only surviving reference to the 6th chain appears in a Jesuit analyst's private notes from the late 20th century. The 6th chain will not break because of violence, but because of something humans create and then lose control of. That line changed the entire direction of the Vatican's research team. Instead of looking backward at history, they began looking forward at the technologies, systems, and innovations humanity was building faster than it could understand them. For the first time, the analysts weren't studying disasters. They were studying inventions. Their internal reports from the 1980s onward all follow the same pattern. New breakthroughs, new capabilities, rapid adoption, and rising concerns about what would happen if those capabilities slipped out of human hands. They weren't afraid of attacks, wars, or revolutions. They were afraid of the moment control disappeared. One internal review states, "The danger is not what we build. The danger is what happens when we can no longer stop what we've built. The researchers compared timelines. Every global breakthrough in the last century was followed by a period of uncertainty. Short windows when nobody fully understood the long-term consequences. Those windows became longer each decade. The risks became harder to measure. The potential impact, far larger than anything seen in the events that broke the first 4 chains. By the early 2000s, Vatican analysts concluded that the 6th era wouldn't begin with a crisis. It would begin with confidence. The moment humanity believes it controls the very thing that later breaks free. A note from 2004 reads, "The 6th era will be the first one we cause willingly. Whatever the 5th era looks like, the 6th will be even worse. Not because of destruction, but because humanity will have built the very thing that unravels it." The 4th chain broke in 2001. Since then, every major breakthrough has brought us closer to a world moving faster than human oversight can follow. If the 6th era is inevitable, the question isn't what we will create next. It's whether we'll still be able to stop it when it turns back on us. The 7th chain is the least documented of them all, not because it was ignored, but because almost every reference to it was removed. Only one handwritten warning survived, found in the margin of a damaged file. When the world falls silent, the tomb will answer. And when it answers, he rises. Unlike the 5th and 6th eras, the 7th era is not described as a failure or a creation. It is described as a condition, a state the world enters, a silence that does not happen gradually, but suddenly. The analysts who studied the fragment believed the warning referred to a level of global quiet that has never occurred in recorded history. No communication, no broadcasts, no movement. A moment when the systems that fill the world with noise stop. The Vatican's internal notes say nothing about how or why such a silence could happen. Only that if it ever does, the response beneath St. Peter's will be immediate. One analyst wrote, "The first 4 chains broke after humanity changed the world. The last one breaks when the world itself changes." The 7th era is not about collapse or invention or control. It is about a threshold. A shift so complete that the world for a moment goes quiet. And in that quiet, the tomb is no longer dormant. It is no longer waiting. It is no longer held back by history, or time, or human error. According to the fragment, the 7th chain is the point where everything that has been contained for centuries answers back. Not gradually, not symbolically, immediately. And when that moment comes, the rise begins. 4 chains have already failed. Each one followed a moment when humanity crossed a line it could never uncross. 1914, 1945, 1968, 2001. None of those failures were accidents. They were consequences. The result of decisions humanity made long before the chains reacted. The last 3 chains remain intact, but they are not protected by stone or metal. They are protected only by time, and by the simple fact that the next 3 eras have not yet happened. The 5th era begins when something the world depends on fails everywhere at once. The 6th era begins when humanity creates something it can no longer stop. And the 7th era, the final one, begins when the world falls silent and the tomb answers. These events have not occurred, but the conditions for each one are already forming. The systems we rely on have never been more fragile. The technologies we build have never moved faster. And global silence, the kind described in the final warning, no longer feels impossible. The first 4 chains fell during the last century. The next 3 belong to this one. If the warnings are correct, the question is no longer whether the chains can hold. It's whether humanity can stop itself from committing the next error. Because if the 7th error ever occurs, the rise doesn't begin with chaos. It begins with silence. You've seen how the chains are failing. But the first and greatest question remains: how was he captured at all? To understand the end, you must see the beginning. The origin story is coming soon. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, or you will miss the next chapter.